2015 has come to a close, and that means it's time for me to review and wrap up how my reading went in the past year. First thing we have to revisit are my goals that I set myself at the beginning of the year. So I had 3 goals that I had set for myself. The first one was to read 52 books. The second one was to participate in the Seasonal Reading Challenge, which was a group on Goodreads that helped you sort of expand your reading and gave you points based on what books you read each little session. And the last thing was to read diversely and pay more attention to what books I'm reading and who those books are by, etc. The third goal is pretty in-depth about how that went, but the first 2 are quite easy to address. Reading 52 novels this year, I did not complete that challenge. I read a total of 45 books this year, helped greatly by the fact that I read 12 graphic novels. If I hadn't picked a bunch of graphic novels up at certain points, I would have been much farther behind. 52 books, 1 per week, was definitely ambitious. Having a full-time job and other interests of mine, I just didn't end up reading as much as I really wanted to, and kind of felt rushed at the end to see if I could improve it, which I decided 45 was a good place to round it off at. The second one, competing in the Seasonal Reading Challenge, I participated in each of the 4 sections because they do it per season, so I did compete in winter, spring, summer, and fall. Had fun, enjoyed it. I didn't win anything big because I never read enough to get big points, but I had fun. However, I will not be continuing with that for 2016. My third challenge, as I mentioned, was to read more diversely and pay more attention to books I was reading in terms of, is the author white? Are they a person of color? What's contained in this novel? Am I reading the same thing a million times, or am I actually reading different kinds of books? That sort of thing. I have some graphs to help me out with this because I kept an Excel file and kept track of what my reading was like this year. The first graph I'd like to focus your attention to is the breakdown of genre that I read for this year. As you can see, it was pretty spread out. I do tend to read a bunch of different stuff. The different colors start with the nonfiction is the blue at the very top, the 8, and then you just kind of go clockwise from there. So you can see nonfiction was actually a big bunch of what I read, and you can see the 12 graphic novels there. I read an essay book for the first time, and I kind of have a smattering of other different types, so those all add up to the 45 books that I read. Nothing spectacular. I didn't have any specific goals in terms of reading this many historical fiction or this many fantasy or nonfiction, because I already felt like I was in a comfortable place with that anyway. So that's just purely for interest's sake. The next graph I have for you is actually the gender of author. I had stated in my wrap-up video from 2014 with my 2015 goals that I already thought I did a pretty good job of balancing female versus male authors, and you can definitely see that in this graph. Where it says not available, that's because I read a humor book which had a bunch of different authors, so it was just sort of a conglomeration. And then the both would be like a graphic novel where it was a combo effort between a male and a female. So still worth mentioning, but obviously I did a perfectly fine job of balancing female versus male. So the next graph I have is the breakdown of the races of the different authors that I read. And you can see here, as predicted, the majority of the authors that I did read were white. However, I was a little bit more conscious of what I was reading this year, and I did end up reading 8 books by people of color. Out of 45, that is 17, almost 18%, which is not great. Definitely room for improvement. The other 2 are once again that humor book that I mentioned, and then also books where there were 2 authors or an illustrator and an author working together to write a graphic novel where one was white and the other was a person of color. Finally, the last thing that I paid attention to was the nationality of an author. I feel like people focus a lot on the white versus person of color and maybe neglect to realize where their authors are from, because that can also affect perspective. As you can see, very heavy on the American authors. And when you see 22 American authors, I mean 22 white American authors. That one book, once again, the random humor book, the 11 British authors that you see there are white British authors. So people of color and authors from other countries, whether it be Ireland or Sri Lanka, they're all contained in that others section. This balance, once again, not great. I would like to pay a bit more attention to what countries I'm reading from in the new year and see how that plays out. Kind of get down that white American influence a bit, and even if I'm reading a white author, maybe I can have a white author from Australia or Germany or just another country, try some translated fiction and just shake it up a bit. Now, on to the fun part of telling you about my top reads for 2015. I ended up having 6 books this year. Normally I do 5, but I had 6 books that I just really felt deserved to be mentioned. Although 5 of them are just sort of in whatever order. The final book, my top book, is in fact my favorite book of 2015. The first book worth mentioning is Into the Wild by Jon Krakauer. This was the first book that I read in 2015, and although I already knew the story of Chris McCandless, had seen the movie, it was really great to actually read the book. I do enjoy Krakauer's writing, and he lends an interesting perspective because he is kind of like Chris McCandless in that he was once a young man who liked to go out into the wilderness and push his limits and maybe get himself into a bit of trouble. So it was nice to have his perspective intermixed with all of what we can sort of deduce what happened to Chris. I did film a discussion video about this, so I will link it down below if you would like a bit more information. Another great book that I read this year is Bad Feminist by Roxane Gay. This is a book of essays, first book of essays that I ever read, and I really enjoyed the format. I found being able to read a couple pages and then move on to a slightly related but still different topic was really wonderful, and it made reading this book a great experience. She has a different point of view and perspective than me, and she writes about things that I have never thought of before, so it really helped open my mind a bit. Another one of my great reads from this year was Deep Down Dark. It's by Hector Tovar. He is writing about the Chilean mine disaster where 33 miners were trapped for many, many days. So it is a nonfiction novel about what happened, how all the wives came together to try and rescue their husbands, how the government got involved, how the world got involved. It was just made into a movie. Haven't seen the movie yet, but the book was very, very engaging. It was one of those books that you couldn't put down because although you knew what happened, how they got there was just crazy. Another great read from this year, Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. This one I had pretty high hopes for going into it because there's been so much buzz around it, and it really did stand up to the hype. The beginning was a bit slow, but in terms of how the story was written and the different characters, and also the fact that this book has stuck with me and I find myself thinking about it even though I finished it a bit ago, that's important too, and so that's what helps it make this top list, is because the writing was beautiful. It was great to see what the world would be like after this epidemic has blown through, but also not just immediately after, but many, many years after, and how humans have learned to survive and cope with the situation they've now been put in. It really sticks with you, and you find it yourself thinking about it when maybe this little thing triggers your memories and you think about all of those moments that you read in this book. Is just really great. Now, I read so many graphic novels this year that how could I go through this video without at least mentioning one? And the one I do want to mention is An Age of License by Lucy Neasley. I believe that's how you pronounce her name. This is a graphic novel about the author's experience of going overseas and traveling around Europe for a while, and just the sights that she saw and the people she met and the things she experienced. And it's a graphic novel, but the pictures are much larger. It's not sort of that graphic novel comic book style. It's very much pictures with the words sort of around it, and you know, speech bubbles. The words become part of the picture, and it was so beautiful. It was such a great style, and I really, really enjoyed the content of the novel too. It's a really fast read, but I could just tell from the moment I picked it up that I was really going to enjoy it, and I definitely did. It is worth mentioning that I read a lot of saga this year, and I enjoyed that as well, but I was really expecting to enjoy that one, whereas An Age of License surprised me with how great it was. The final book that I want to mention is in fact my favorite book that I read this year, and that is Brain on Fire by Susanna Cahalan. I filmed a whole review about this, so I'm not going to get into too much detail, link down below, but it is a nonfiction medical mystery book about what happened to Susanna and how everyone thought she was going crazy, but it was really a fixable medical mystery, and it is so intense. Another book that I just could not put down because I wanted to know what was going to happen. And you know she made it out because she wrote the book, but at the same time it is so frustrating and intense to watch these doctors struggle and to see just how far gone she was before they were finally able to pull her back and figure out what was wrong with her. Well worth your time. It's a great, great read and well deserving of the #1 spot for my books that I read in 2015. That's it, my friends, my 2015 reading review and wrap up. This is a great time to watch videos because then you end up going to your Goodreads TBR and just adding a bunch of books to it because everybody's talking about those wonderful, wonderful books that they read. All the links are in the doobly-doo, including any links that I mentioned in this video. As always, you can check those out if you feel so inclined. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you later.